Hi, it's Al here from the Rider Firm, and today I'm going to walk you through getting your privateer ready to hit the trails. First thing you're going to need is some side cutters or a knife or some scissors to get the box open and take the packaging off your new bike. You'll also need some Allen keys, some Torx keys, and preferably, if you've got one, a torque wrench. You'll also need a track pump, a shock pump to set up your suspension, and if you've got one, the whole job will be a lot easier with a work stand. With the bike out of the box, next step is to remove all of the packaging. So using your side cutters or similar to cut the zip ties, and get busy. Be careful that you don't damage the bike when you're removing the packaging. Don't want to scratch the finish or cut through any hoses or anything. There she is. What beauty. Now we're ready to put the bike in the stand. Before you do so, it's well worth checking the torque on the seat clamp to make sure your seat post is nice and tight in the frame. There is a torque setting, a max torque setting on most seat clamps. On this, it's 8, but check before you tighten it. Once that's tightened, just check that it's good and solid, because you don't want the post to slide out when the bike's in the stand. Next, we'll just pop the post up and we'll get it in the stand. Mount the bike into the stand securely. Next step is to fit the bars to the bike. This bike's got a race face stem and it's got a top lock bar clamp. So with regular stems, you would have an even gap top and bottom. On this stem, the two top bolts need to be tightened all the way to torque so they touch. And then the bottom bolts are torqued afterwards. So have a look to see what stem you've got on your bike to make sure you're doing it properly. So to start with, we're undoing all of the bolts. With the face plate removed, we can fit the bars. When you fit these, make sure that the hoses and cables are orientated correctly. If we get the bars roughly in position, we can tweak that once we've got the bike out of the stand. And we're doing these top two bolts up fully. Torque setting on this race face stem is 6 Newton meters, but just check your stem to make sure it's the same. And we're tightening the top two bolts fully to 6 Newton meters. That's then followed by the bottom two bolts. Just do them up bit by bit. And that's all of the bolts fully tightened and the bar secured. Although we're probably going to tweak it later on, it's well worth just torquing the stem bolts now. They're probably tight anyway, but just to make sure, because you definitely don't want to forget this later on down the line. With this stem, the torque setting is 8 Newton meters. That's all secure. One neat feature of the privateer frames is the cable and hose guides on the head tube. So route your hose and gear cable correctly and then just knit these up. They don't need to be super tight, about 3 Newton meters will do the job. Now we're ready to fit the front wheel. You're going to need to remove the spacer from in between the brake pads here. Once you've got that out, be careful not to pull the brake lever. Remove the axle from the fork. Torque setting on this is 9 to 13.5 Newton meters. We've got the torque wrench set at 12 here. Fitting the wheel, just make sure that the rotor sits in between the pads. Slide the axle through and tighten it to torque. Next up, we're going to fit our pedals of choice. Obviously these don't come with the bike, so fit whatever you prefer. Good idea to add a bit of grease to the pedal threads. When you fit your pedals, make sure that you fit the right pedal to the right side of the bike and the left to the left. It's easy to mix them up. And they always tighten to the front of the bike. If you've got pedal washers included with the cranks that are fitted on your bike, then make sure that they're installed. Make sure that your pedals are good and secure. So the left-hand pedal has a left-hand thread. Again, easiest way to remember is to tighten both the pedals towards the front of the bike. Your gears and brakes should be set up already, but it's good practice just to check them over before you go for your first ride. We'll take a look at the gears first, and the most important part of this is that the stops, that's your high and low stop on the rear derailleur, are set correctly. Those stops prevent the chain from derailing off the cassette at either end. We can check that by turning the pedals, and we're in top gear here, so the smallest sprocket, and we're physically just giving the derailleur a little tug just to see if the chain will come off. And we can see here that it won't, and if we move the mech up, the chain happily drops down into top gear. Check the low stop by pushing the derailleur all the way over and give it a little bit of a push just to make sure that the chain won't ride over that first sprocket. With the gears, next step is just to check the indexing. So that's just to make sure that you shift one gear with every click of the shifter. So we can see there, gears are all set up and ready to go. Next, we're going to move on to brakes. These should also be set up correctly, but it's worth having a check. This caliper's come very nicely centered over the rotor, so no rubbing at all. If you do have any rubbing and it's excessive, then the best way to fix it is to slacken the mounting bolts very slightly. Give the lever a good pull and then retighten the bolts. This is an area that you do want to be using a torque wrench if you can. On this bike we've got SRAM brakes and the torque setting is 9.5 Newton meters. If you've got different brakes on your bike, obviously check the torque settings for those brakes. There we go, all nicely centered. Obviously you need to repeat the same for the front brake to make sure that that's running nicely, as this one is. So we're nearly there now, pretty much ready to get the bike out of the stand and do some final tweaking. But one thing that we would recommend, which is a good idea to do on a regular basis, maybe even before every ride, is something called the M-check. So that is tracing a line from the rear axle up to the saddle and the seat post, down to the bottom bracket area, up towards your cockpit, and then down to the front hub. And as you go, we're checking bolts and checking that everything works as it should. Make sure that your bike's good and safe. With the bike out the work stand, we're just going to do some tweaks. First thing we're going to do is check the tyre pressure. Good starting point is 30 psi. Now's a good time to check the sag of your fork and your rear shock. We've got a really good basic guide in the user manual online. That's privateerbikes.com. So if you want to take a read through that. For basic pressure settings, go by the manufacturer's settings to start with and then work from there. Next, we're going to tweak our saddle position so we can adjust the saddle height, the saddle angle, and also how far forward and back it sits on the seat post. Once you're happy with the position, then make sure that you tighten all the bolts to the manufacturer's recommended torque. One thing we would recommend is at least every 6 months, you take your seat post out, give it a clean and reapply some fresh grease, anti-seize or some carbon paste to the post before reinserting it. That'll help prevent it from seizing in place. Final thing that you need to do is to tweak your cockpit. So get your bars set up how you would like them. Make sure they're nice and central and your stem's nice and straight. Your bars are rolled how you'd like them. Make sure your grips are good and tight and not gonna come off. Position your brake levers how you would like them. So tweak the angle, reach of the lever and how far inboard or outboard they sit. Once you've done that, final safety check, just to make sure that that stem's good and tight. Get that front wheel between your legs and try and twist the bars. Make sure that they're good and tight in the stem before you go out for your first ride. So that's it, she's ready to ride. If you need any help at all, then please contact us through privateerbikes.com. You can call us, email us, or contact us on live chat. Please also check out our social media pages, and thank you very much for your support and for watching the video. Cheers.